I now call the Prime Minister to make his statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll update the House on the Government's response to events at home and abroad during the Easter recess. I will come to Ukraine in a moment, since I've just left a virtual meeting with President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz and 8 other world leaders. But let me begin in all humility by saying that on the 12th of April, I received a fixed penalty notice relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. I paid the fine immediately, and I offered the British people a full apology. And I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. As soon as I received the notice, I acknowledged the hurt and the anger. And I said that people had a right to expect better of their Prime Minister. And I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, again in the House now. Let me also say, not by way of mitigation or excuse, but purely because it explains my previous words in this House, that it did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules. I repeat, that was my mistake, and I apologise for it unreservedly. I respect the outcome of the police investigation, which is still underway, and I can only say that I will respect their decision-making and always take the appropriate steps. And as the House will know, I have already taken significant steps to change the way things work in Number 10. And it is precisely because I know that so many people are angry and disappointed that I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people and to respond in the best traditions of our country to Putin's barbaric onslaught against Ukraine. Our Ukrainian friends are fighting for the life of their nation, and they achieved the greatest feat of arms of the 21st century by repelling the Russian assault on Kiev. And the whole House will share my admiration for their heroism and courage. Putin arrogantly assumed that he would capture Kiev in a matter of days, and now the blackened carcasses of his tanks and heavy armour litter the approaches to the capital on both banks of the Dnieper and are smouldering monuments to his failure. Having pulverised the invaders' armoured spearheads, the Ukrainians then counterattacked, and by the 6th of April, Putin had been compelled to withdraw his forces from the entire Kiev region. Britain and our allies supplied some of the weaponry, but it was Ukrainian valour and sacrifice which saved their capital. I travelled to Kiev myself on the 9th of April, the first G7 leader to visit since the invasion, and I spent 4 hours with President Volodymyr Zelensky, the indomitable leader of a nation fighting for survival who gives the roar of a lion-hearted people. I assured him of the implacable resolve of the United Kingdom, shared across this House, to join with our allies and give his brave people the weapons they need to defend themselves. When the President and I went for an impromptu walk through central Kiev, we happened upon a man who immediately expressed his love for Britain and the British people. And he was generous enough to say, quite unprompted, I should reassure the House, I will tell my children and grandchildren they must always remember that Britain helped us. But the urgency is even greater now because Putin has regrouped his forces and launched a new offensive in the Donbass. We knew this danger would come. And when I welcomed President Duda of Poland to Downing Street on the 7th of April and Chancellor Scholz the following day, we discussed exactly how we could provide the arms that Ukraine would desperately need to counter Putin's next onslaught. On the 12th of April, I spoke to President Biden to brief him on my visit to Kiev and how we will intensify our support for President Zelensky, and I proposed that our long-term goal must be to strengthen and fortify Ukraine to the point where Russia will never dare to invade again. Just as our foreign policy must look to the long term, the same is true of this government's domestic priorities. And as we face the economic aftershocks of COVID and the consequences of Russian aggression, that is above all in tackling the impact on British energy prices and on consumers and on family bills. And that's why we're spending over £9 billion to help families struggling with their bills. We're helping families to insulate their homes and reduce costs, and to end our dependence on Putin's oil and gas, and to ensure that energy is cheaper in the long term. We published on the 7th of April a new strategy to make British energy greener, more affordable and more secure. We will massively expand offshore wind, and in the country that split the atom, we will build a new reactor not every decade, but every year. This government is joining with our allies to face down Putin's aggression abroad while addressing the toughest problems at home, helping millions of families with the cost of living, making our streets safer and funding the NHS to clear the COVID backlog. My job is to work every day to make the British people safer, more secure and more prosperous, and that is what I will continue to do, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
What a joke. Even now, as the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other. But the damage is already done. The public have made up their mind. They don't believe a word the Prime Minister says. They know what he is. As ever with this Prime Minister, those close to him find themselves ruined, and the institutions he vows to protect damaged. Good ministers forced to walk away from public service, the Chancellor's career up in flames, and the leader of the Scottish Conservatives rendered pathetic. For all those unfamiliar with this Prime Minister's career, this isn't some fixable glitch in the system. It's the whole point. It's what he does. It's who he is. He knows he's dishonest and incapable of changing, so he drags everybody else down with him. The more people debase themselves, parroting is
Order! I can't hear what's being said because you're making trouble. Mr. Fabricant, I'm all right. Keir Starmer. What I would say is I think the leader said dishonest. I don't think that's an appropriate word to be. I think I will make. We don't want to talk about breaking rules, do we? I don't think that's a good time to discuss. I just say, I think if he just withdraws that and works around it, I'm sure that with the knowledge that he's gained over many, many years, he can use appropriate words that is in keeping with good temperate language of this House. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I respect that ruling from the Chair. The Prime Minister knows what he is. And so he drags everyone else down with him. The more people debase themselves parroting his absurd defences, the more the public will believe all politicians are the same, all as bad as each other, and that suits this Prime Minister just fine. Some members opposite seem oblivious to the Prime Minister's game. Some know what he's up to, but are too weak to act. But others are gleefully playing the part the Prime Minister cast for them. a minister on the radio this morning saying it's the same as a speeding ticket. No, it's not. No one has ever broken down in tears because they couldn't drive faster than 20 miles an hour outside a school. Don't insult the public with this nonsense. But, Mr. Speaker, as it happens, the last minister who got a speeding ticket and then lied about it ended up in prison, and I know because I prosecuted him. And last week, we were treated to a grotesque spectacle. One of the Prime Minister's loyal supporters accusing teachers and nurses of drinking in the staff room during lockdown. Members opposite can associate themselves with that if they want. But those of us who take pride in our NHS workers, our teachers, and every other key worker who got us through those dark days will never forget their contempt. Plenty didn't agree with every rule the Prime Minister wrote, but they followed them nonetheless. Because in this country, we respect others. We put the greater good above narrow self-interest, and we understand that the rules apply to all of us. This morning, I spoke to John Robinson, a constituent of the member for Lichfield. I want to tell you his story. When his wife died of COVID, John and his family obeyed the Prime Minister's rules. He didn't see her in hospital. He didn't hold her hand as she died. Their daughters and grandchildren drove 100 miles up the motorway, clutching a letter from the funeral director in case they were questioned by the police. They didn't have a service in the church. John's son-in-law stayed away because he would have been the forbidden seventh mourner. Doesn't the Prime Minister realise that John would have given the world to hold his dying wife's hand, even if it was just for 9 minutes? But he didn't, because he followed the Prime Minister's rules. Rules that we now know the Prime Minister blithely, repeatedly and deliberately ignored. After months of insulting excuses, today's half-hearted apology will never be enough for John Robinson. If the Prime Minister had any respect for John and the millions like him who sacrificed everything to follow the rules, he'd resign. But he won't, because he doesn't respect John. He doesn't respect the sacrifice of the British public. He is a man without shame. Looking past the member for Lichfield and the nodding dogs in the cabinet, there are many decent, honourable members on the benches opposite who do respect John Robinson, who do respect the British public. They know the damage the Prime Minister is doing. They know things can't go on as they are. And they know it's their responsibility to bring an end to this shameful chapter. Today I urge them once again, don't follow in the slipstream of an out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister. Put their conscience first. Put their country first. Put John Robinson first. And remove the Prime Minister from office. Bring decency, honesty and integrity back into our politics. And stop the denigration of everything that this country stands for. Thank you.
Sir William, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise once again profusely to John Robinson, to all those who lost loved ones, particularly those who suffered during the pandemic. And Mr. Speaker, in my statement I have tried to explain why I spoke to the House as I did. The right honourable gentleman has chosen to respond with a series of personal attacks on me, and I understand why he does that. But I think, and I understand that, Mr. Speaker, but I think it would have been a good thing if in the course of his remarks he had addressed some of the issues that I mentioned, not least the crisis in Ukraine, with the impact that is having on the livelihoods of everybody in this country. And it is to address that that this government will get on with our job, Mr. Speaker. It is to focus on the needs of the British people. And when he talks about nodding dogs, Mr. Speaker, I'd remind the House that there was a certain nodding dog who sat nodding in the previous Labour shadow cabinet, Mr. Speaker, that would happily have installed the honourable member for Islington North and made, I think, a disastrous mistake in the security of our country at a very difficult time. This government will get on with the difficult job of taking us through the aftershocks of the COVID pandemic, leading not just this country, but I think the world in our response to the violence that we're seeing in Ukraine. I must say that I renew my apologies. I renew my apologies to John Robertson, to families up and down the land. But I think the best thing that we can do now for this country as politicians is not to indulge in personal abuse of the kind that we've heard and to get on with our jobs.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having heard the remarks both of my right honourable friend and the Leader of the Opposition, may I put it to the House that my right honourable friend, I'm sure, appreciates that it is crystal clear that a fixed penalty notice, such as in his own case, is a civil penalty fine, which, if paid within 28 days, eliminates future prosecution in the criminal courts, and furthermore, without any admission of guilt. In a recent criminal case, in a recent criminal appeal case, and in that judgment, it was said that if the payment was made within those 28 days, a fixed penalty notice was held not to be a conviction, as the defendant, to quote the court's judgment, quote, was not admitting an offence or criminality and would have no stain imputed to his character. That is the perspective, and that is the case.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make it absolutely clear that I in no way minimise the importance of this fine, and I am heartily sorry for my mistake, and I accept completely the decision of the police.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let us remind ourselves that on the 8th of December last year, the Prime Minister denied that any parties happened in 10 Downing Street. They are the very same parties that the police have now fined the Prime Minister for attending. By now, people know that the rules of this House prevent me from saying that the Prime Minister deliberately and willfully misled this House. But maybe today that matters little, because the public have already made up their minds. YouGov polling shows 75% of the British public and 82% of people in Scotland have made their minds up on the Prime Minister. The public knows the difference between the truth and lying.
Hear, hear.
And they know that the Prime Minister is only apologising for one reason, and one reason only. It's the only reason he ever apologises, because he's been caught. After months of denials, his excuses have finally run out of road, and so must his time in office. The Prime Minister has broken the very laws he wrote. To try and argue that he did not know he had broken his own laws would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. Prime Minister, you can't hide behind advisers. He knows, we know, that the dogs in the street know that the Prime Minister has broken the law. This is the first Prime Minister to be officially found to have broken the law in office. A law-breaking Prime Minister. Just dwell on this. A Prime Minister who has broken the law and remains under investigation over additional lawbreaking. Not just a lawbreaker, a serial offender. If he has any decency, any dignity, he would not just apologise, he would resign. Yes. Mr. Speaker, the scale and the seriousness of the issues we are all now facing demand effective leadership from a Prime Minister who can be trusted. The Tory cost of living crisis and the war crimes being inflicted on the Ukrainian people need our full focus. In a time of crisis, the very least the public deserves is a Prime Minister they can trust to tell the truth. And for this Prime Minister, that trust is broken and it can never be fixed. The truth is that a majority of people across these islands will never trust a single word he says again. So the questions today are not so much for a Prime Minister desperately clinging on to power. The real question is for Tory backbenchers. Will they finally grow a spine and remove this person from office? Or is the Tory strategy to go on about standing behind a Prime Minister who the public can't trust with the truth?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I direct the right honourable what I said earlier. I apologise profusely for my mistake and for what I have got wrong, and I repeat that. He asks about whether this government is capable of providing effective leadership during the current crisis and in standing up to Russia, and I would just remind him that I think it is still the policy of the Scottish National Party to dispense with this country's independent nuclear deterrent at a particularly crucial time. I don't think that's what this country needs right now.
John Whittingdale.
Many of my constituents are angry about breaches which happened 2 years ago, and I welcome the Prime Minister's recognition of that and his apology. But does he agree that we currently face the gravest crisis in our global security for a long time, and it is essential that we remain focused on beating Putin and stopping the aggression against Ukraine? Can he say what additional measures we can now give to Ukraine following his discussion with President Biden and others to ensure that Putin's aggression cannot be allowed to succeed?
I thank my right honourable friend, and I repeat my apologies, my contrition. But I want to say on the state of the war in Ukraine, it's at a very perilous stage, and it is vital now that we don't allow Putin to gain momentum in the Donbass as he well could, and in the east, and that's why we are stepping up our supply of military hardware, the kind that I think the Ukrainians particularly need now. This will become an artillery conflict. They need support with more artillery. That is what we will be giving them, Mr. Speaker, in addition to many other forms of support.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see that the Prime Minister is anxious to move on to other issues, and I think the question is, can he do that? And I would take one example. Can he perhaps explain to me, to the House and to the country, how he can credibly justify, on the one hand, calling for the resignation of the boss of P&O Ferries, when he faced allegations that he broke the law, while on the other hand, refusing to resign when he himself is guilty of actually breaking the law he set?
I thank her very much, and I think that what the P&O Ferries did was entirely wrong, as I've told the House before. And I think, by the way, that I made a serious mistake, and I apologise for it very sincerely.
Mark Harper, I lost him.
Speaker, I strongly support the government's actions in standing up to Putin's aggression and helping Ukraine defend itself and our values. And it's exactly at times like this that our country needs a Prime Minister who exemplifies those values. I regret to say that we have a Prime Minister who broke the laws that he told the country they had to follow, hasn't been straightforward about it, and is now going to ask the decent men and women on these benches to defend what I think is indefensible. I'm very sorry to have to say this, but I no longer think he is worthy of the great office that he holds.
I must say to my right honourable friend, I know the care and the sincerity with which he weighs his words, and I bitterly regret what has happened. I bitterly regret the event in Downing Street, as I have said. But I do believe that it is the job of this government to get on with the priorities of the British people, and that is what we're going to do.
Ed David.
Speaker, a poll over the weekend asked 2,000 people what they think of the Prime Minister. The most common word they used, by far, was liar. Yep. Does the Prime Minister understand how profoundly damaging it is to our great country to have a government led by a man the public no longer trust and no longer have confidence in? Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister won't resign, will he at least give Conservative MPs on Thursday a free vote? So Conservative MPs can decide for themselves whether the Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament or was just so incompetent that he didn't even understand his own laws.
Mr. Speaker, I repeat what I've said earlier. I disagree profoundly with what he's just said, but I repeat my apology to the House and to the country.
Jake Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Rossendale and Darwin will have weighed the words of the Prime Minister carefully, listening to them today, and they will, like me, feel that it is a contrite and wholehearted apology. They will also be looking at the action of the Prime Minister in Ukraine, and I wonder if he would consider putting Britain at the forefront of a new Marshall Plan to rebuild Ukraine after Putin has been defeated, and fund this in part by the assets confiscated by the British state from Russian oligarchs.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent suggestion? It's one, indeed, that the UK government is already pursuing, and in my conversations with President Zelensky, we did discuss exactly how the supporters and friends of Ukraine around the world can help to rebuild that beautiful country when the conflict is over.
Coulter.
Mr. Speaker, we've always known, haven't we, that he was only ever sorry because he was caught banged to rights. And this latest spin about the Met having it wrong is designed to bully the Met and to provide cover to his backbenchers that haven't got the bottle to sack him. But the country has already concluded that he's either a liar or an idiot.
Sorry. I said we want temperate language. When we have the motion on Thursday, that's a different matter. For today, we're not using language like that.
Well, I withdraw the word liar, Mr. Speaker, but the electorate will have already decided. But what everybody knows is that he is a lawbreaker. Yeah. So if the Met have got the wrong end of the stick, why doesn't he challenge these penalties before the criminal courts? Have his day in court.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much, and I just want to repeat what I said in my statement earlier, which is I fully respect the decision of the police.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Does my right honourable friend have the power to authorise Sue Gray to publish her report in full? And if so, will he use that power in order to put an end to this matter so that we do not get diverted away, as we are being, from such crucial question as supplying armaments to Ukrainian Democrats?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, but I think it very important that the Met should conclude their investigation before the Sue Gray's final report.
Today marks the Prime Minister's 1,000th day in office. It takes a particular type of Prime Minister to rack up as many catastrophic failures, scandals as U-turns as days on the job. From the Tory-made cost of living crisis, dodgy COVID contracts for his cronies, unlawfully proroguing Parliament, and now breaking the law. Enough is enough. So will the Prime Minister confirm if this 1000th day will be his last?